I'm really pleased that annoying little icon removed itself from the bottom. Hi everyone. Thank you so much for being here today, and thank you, Chris, for that really kind introduction. It's really good to be here. As you know, I'm James McLeod, and I lead the open source program for NatWest Group. You may have known me in my previous role as Director of Community of Finos. So I absolutely believe that we're here amongst friends today. Such is life within the open source community. So today I want to speak to you about engineering and open source culture in NatWest Group. I've had the privilege of being within my role now for just over 4 weeks. I'm into my 5th week. And when I saw that State of OpenCon was running in early Feb, I thought, okay, I'm going to have to get onto the stage and talk about what we're doing in NatWest, because that'll give us another 6 months, until we hit the conference circuit before I can start talking about it again. So from a NatWest perspective, everything within open source is coming from the perspective of engineering, but also the perspective of open source engineering culture. We, are a bank. We're a very big bank. You'll see us on the high street, and you'll see lots of different footballers, in adverts talking about the products that we do, and also the way that we engage just the regular, community around the UK. But that also means that we need to keep our engineering safe. But primarily, in order to be successful in open source, we need to bring our engineers on the journey of that as well. So within NatWest, we foster a positive engineering culture of collaboration, co-creation and reuse, pioneered through inner source and open source principles and best practices to increase engineering efficiencies, reduce engineering costs, whilst protecting and operating effectively to get products to customers faster. So from my point of view, I see the journey that we are on within NatWest as an extension to everybody's engineering and digital transformation efforts. But rather than, stopping at the phase of migrating to cloud or implementing automation through DevOps or maybe even SRE, the next phase of our engineering transformation is actually collaboration across engineers. This is both within the bank through inner source, as people may have heard, and it's also outside of the bank through the open source engineering ecosystem, and also the community and culture, such as what we're doing today, coming together, learning off of each other, giving people opportunities to speak, and really growing people's personas and engineering experiences. So within NatWest, we're building a fully collaborative and empowered financial services engineering ecosystem. And the reason that we are doing this is because we want to accelerate and also consume safely from the open source community. So everything that's been spoken about within OpenUK, whether it's within the financial services track, which, is a vertical into a very specific part of the open source industry, or whether it's on one of the great horizontals across, security, maybe even talking through artificial intelligence and everything that brings in the future, we want to make sure that everything that we consume is consumed safely. And so as part of the open source program office, just in the same way as the City team have been talking about Git proxy and how you can contribute, maybe even build an ecosystem around code and where code resides, we also want to bring, a cyber and security and open source, first culture into the bank. But ultimately, we want to do this, number one, to, give back to the industry and also, use open source and open source licensing, where it's, appropriate from within the bank, but also use it as a way to maybe rewrite some of the rules around how you engage with, the industry, because we do have a reliance on tech vendors and others to supply services to us. And the open source industry actually allows us to have a level playing field about how we actually communicate our requirements and how we build standards which can, work to further the way that open source actually operates, and it furthers the knowledge, within the open source community. But it also means that we can then have a lot more vendors or a lot more people who we can engage with that makes open source and technology a lot more competitive as well. And so targeted commercial displacement is definitely, one of the strategic reasons for engaging in open source. Then there's the inner source and the co-creation side. We also have thousands of engineers spanning, the length of the UK and also into India as well. We're very much, a global organization. And we're definitely a global organization now that we're engaging openly through open source. But we want to take that to the next level. We want our engineers to be focusing on our features and delivering against our feature team requirements. But rather than going straight to story pointing and pre-sprint planning on solving, our own feature team problems, we want to see whether those problems have been solved elsewhere, or maybe even think about, if I am solving this problem, how can I solve this problem so others can consume from it? And that means, not just writing code and putting it into repositories, but thinking about, how code is documented in a way that others from within the organization can consume that. And also being, very open with, where that project is within the maturity of its own life cycle. So people know that they can consume using, that library without it being archived or without it being redundant. And so this is all part of the co-creation and inner source, methodologies. But then there's also open source community participation. If anybody came to NatWest at the end of last year, you know that we had one of the Finos open source meetups at NatWest Group talking about AI. We also get involved in diversity, equity, and inclusion events, in and around the capital and further afield as well. Plus, you're going to notice a lot more engineers, joining OpenUK plus other community events, talking about open source. So community participation is absolutely one of those strategic pillars. Plus also realizing that, we're not the only pioneers of open source. There are many different areas of open source and open source expertise that we can both leverage and contribute into, from a banking perspective. So I've put up here a number of different foundations and groups that I absolutely, see as imperative for, NatWest to be involved in. But this isn't kind of like a blocked off list. I've also been speaking today to Eclipse Foundation. So to do very good around, creating OSPOs, but the Eclipse Foundation also have an OSPO group as well, and it's very important that we are very open to everybody's perspectives and bring that into the center and use that. In the same way as Inner Source Commons also publish patterns surrounding inner source collaboration and how to, work effectively as joined up internal engineering groups. And of course, OpenUK as well. So where are we at with our open source journey within NatWest? So NatWest are a Finos member. We are a gold member, and we have been for a number of years. We originally joined Finos through our NatWest Markets area of the bank, which is capital markets. But that membership has now traveled across to NatWest Group, which is actually kind of like the entire enterprise of NatWest. And so not only can the capital market side of NatWest contribute and get involved in open source, through Finos and others, but it's also kind of like the wider engineering group all the way through to, our engineers in India as well. We are a consumer and contributor of the FDC3 project, which is a standard through Finos. So through NatWest Markets, we do have trading desktops, and we have use cases that need to be solved. We also are a consumer of Waltz, which is one of the earlier projects that was contributed by Deutsche Bank and then contributed across into Finos. We actually have committed code in Waltz, which is fantastic. Fair enough, we need to rejoin and kind of like grease those gears and, start contributing more. But we are a consumer of awards, and, we have engaged with them. We have also engaged in the Common Cloud Controls project, which was contributed into Films by City. So it's great to be, in the same room as the City team, who are, contributing heavily, and we realise that. Plus, we've also got great opportunities, to do more within our bank of APIs. And you're going to be, so Andrea Monu from our open banking team, engineering lead, will be on a panel discussion later talking more about the possibilities of open source within open banking as well. Plus, there's also Python, machine learning, and utilities that, we can get involved in and do more with. And so NatWest Group, has a huge appetite and is already contributing into the open source community. So we have decided, through this to create an open source program office, and you'll hear that a lot now. It's becoming a very common industry term, and it's actually a really great turning point for enterprises, across the board to have OSPOs and people who really understand the reason why and also the how of contributing and consuming safely from open source. You'll notice that there's a bit of a heat map of different firms that already have OSPOs. It could be the case that you are working for one of them. This was taken from the To-Do group. And the real good thing from a banking perspective is that there are many of our vendors and the people who we work with who also have OSPOs. And so we can create this ecosystem of, collaboration and trust, knowing that we have an OSPO and the people who we work with also have one. We, within NatWest, have already contributed, to open source initiatives. And we have also done some preliminary work within the bank to get ourselves engaged with open source. So we do actually have a policy and guideline for our engineers to contribute into open source. We need to revisit and, take a leaf out of Jamie and Kat's book about all of the various different use cases, that engineers may want to consume in. And so that's one, piece of learning that I'll take away from here. So thank you, team. But as I said previously, we are contributing into awards. We have also contributed into the FDC3 ecosystem already with a project called Backplane, which is a .NET version of, many of the different conduits for FDC3 that you may see on the market. Plus, we've also got our bank of APIs where we can start using open source to describe SDKs and maybe even start suggesting different standards to, demonstrate where the regulated open banking standards have moved forward and the different things that have been done within NatWest. Plus, we also have a massive appetite to get involved with other things. Springbot, which Rob contributed through Deutsche Bank, is one of those things as well. And as I mentioned earlier, tons of community activities that we're, wanting to get involved in and have already got involved in. So the OSPO, so we've built upon our collaborative foundations by creating the open source program office. So our mission is to transform NatWest into a collaborative, efficient and cost-saving financial services engineering community. By applying best principles and practices of inner source and open source, whilst doing that in a safe and secure and very policy-driven way. So we can drive a positive engineering culture and make sure that people are learning and progressing and being rewarded for those activities. So gone are the days where open source is a side of desk activity, and people aspire to open source by doing it outside of work. We want to bring that contribution and also culture of open source into work. So we're collaborating and talking about open source in the open rather than whispering to our friends to one side, what we do in our spare time and what meetups that we go to. But ultimately, within the OSPO, we also need to be really aware of the risks of open source as well. So everybody in the room will have heard of Log4j. We are very much aware of the risks surrounding the consumption of open source. We're very much aware of the responsibility the engineers within the organizations have when they consume dependencies, and what that means, if those dependencies, if they're not tracked, can end up, if they're not updated or not kept to the versions that are needed, as the open source community progresses with releasing new version releases, etc. And we're also very much aware of, the consequences, of not keeping up to date, with the different types of libraries and components and open source that we're bringing into the bank. And so from an OSPO perspective, we are working with our engineering platforms team to make sure that they are fully aware, and they are fully aware, of ways in which we can actually use automation and various different tools to track software bill of materials and make sure that all of our dependencies are being consumed and they meet our cybersecurity and also engineering expectations across all engineering disciplines. So open source within NatWest isn't just a software engineering, opportunity. It's also an opportunity across all disciplines of engineering, and we're very much aware of that. But alongside with, opening up that appetite across all of those various different disciplines, we also need to understand how we mitigate the risks, that we could actually, bring into the bank as well. So I'd like to, talk to you about how the Open Source Program Office, is being constructed, and the different groups that we are engaging with as part of the OSPO to, number one, increase the velocity of engineering, both inside the bank and also leveraging open source in order to increase the velocity and make ourselves more efficient. Plus also, mitigate the risks of legal and policy and cybersecurity. So, just so happens that within the OSPO, we also have an OSPO operations team. At the moment, they are putting their hand up at the front here, but they are going to expand. Plus, we are a very collaborative organisation, and I am part of a team that has already put their, hand up to offer support and really virtualize, the OSPO as it's getting up and running before, more people join and are able to push in that area. But the OSPO operational team, will work to keep the gears running, keep, the OSPO on track, make sure all of the reporting and all of the, questions that come into the OSPO are answered in a timely way. And we're also going to be measuring against that as well, to make sure that, the OSPO is also measured in the same way as other engineering teams are measured against, the work that they are doing in a very agile way and in a very open way as well. We're also engaging with our security and license governance team, who just so happen to be in Edinburgh. And so a really great way to, get to travel to another beautiful city in the UK. We're engaging with them in coordination also with the Linux Foundation, because as part of our membership within the Linux Foundation, there is a Linux Foundation legal team. So we're fully aware that this whole open source, community that we belong to can also answer questions relating to open source through legal, as well as solve, common engineering problems as well. So security and license, making sure that we're not consuming proprietary licenses or licenses, that can trip us up down the line. And also having, iterative, updated list of licenses that are safe to consume as well. We also have our engineering practices and principles. So this is where principal engineers and other engineers from across the bank get together in order to maybe contribute, into our GitLab repositories, common templates and common patterns and common ways to solve engineering problems. This is This is already taken place by having common GitLab runner templates and pipelines that are being consumed and also contributed into by NatWest engineers within the bank. But the OSPO will definitely highlight, more of these types of templates and patterns, and also provide more that can be consumed by other engineering teams as a form of accelerator when it comes to internal and external open source engagement. The other thing that's really important is engineering training and certification. So making sure that engineers, have access to training that can bring them up to speed, with all of the various different practices and principles of open source, including training that has been written, by the Finos team and the Linux Foundation, plus also other trainings that can feed into engineering careers. And also offer rewards and successes against, people's career goals and aspirations as well. The great thing about engineering training and certification is that you can hit people at source, so you can put this on the agenda of people so they go through the training and they learn about it, rather than needing to go and knock on the door and convince individuals that open source is a great thing. We can actually provide this. Now, something that I'm sure everybody speaks about, but I also want to, tip my hat to, is procurement as well. So making sure that when it comes to engaging various different software systems and software applications, open source is also represented in the list of procurement and also vendor applications. So we're not just, targeting specific vendors for specific projects or applications. Having access to a whole different array of open source alternative to vendor products not only gives engineers the opportunity to select applications that are more applicable to the problems that they're solving, but it also gives the bank a greater opportunity to negotiate on license charges or, use that competition benefit and also what I was speaking about earlier about having standardization to make sure that various different standards are actually being offered by lots of different vendors. And so this is where having procurement on board as well really does help. And then marketing, events and communities, making sure that the OSPO is there, providing access to events like today, where I've brought some NatWest engineering colleagues with me, and, making sure that engineers are able to join meetups and also host their own meetups, and also partake in the wider open source community that I've had the privilege of being part of for maybe the last 10 or 12 years. And then finally, making sure that compliance and controls and audit, and that from a legal perspective is also engaged. So rather than running headfirst into the torrent of open source, make sure that you've got a good lawyer by your side who's willing to keep you honest on all of your ideas and everything that you do as you move forward. Plus then there are also kind of external engagements as well. So we will be measuring all of our activity and striving forward with measures that we can get from within the bank, but it's also important that you're able to measure your activity outside of the bank as well. And this is where various different foundations are able to help us, measure our activity into various different open source projects as well, which is also very important. And as Rob Moffat was saying before, making sure that we're both contributing our learnings and our findings into open source readiness by Finos and also the to-do group. plus also consuming what others have learnt as well, which I have been doing over the last couple of talks as well. And so I'd like to say thank you to the information that I've learnt today. So what I would like to show you is just kind of like a very quick diagram of what the OSPO actually looks like. As I was saying before, we are a virtual team. You know, there are a couple of central roles within the NatWest OSPO. And so having that engineering, you know, discipline within the OSPO across software, cloud, DevOps, you know, and various different touch points where the rubber hits the road is actually really important, you know, so we can actually practice what it is that we're asking people to do. Plus then having the OSPO operations, which is basically your agile team, to make sure the lights are switched on and also the doors are closed as people leave the building. But then we also intersect with various other areas within the bank as well, because open source also needs people to go out there and advocate for it. So having a conduit into marketing events and community and, you know, the various different internal and external newsletters and press releases, etc. Internal engineering training, and basically I'm reading through the list that I went through before. But this is how all of these intersect with the OSPO. Right, so this is a quick schematic of how this fits together when it does come to engineering. So I'm actually really pleased that we've had the previous two talks, because we've spoken a lot about Git proxy this afternoon, right? So I remember being at a previous event when we were talking about FDC3. But I'm actually really happy to say here that NatWest is moving forward with integrating Git proxy into our software delivery lifecycle when it actually comes to open source. We do have an internal process for inner source and also potential external contribution, but it doesn't cover all of our various different scenarios. And so what you can actually see here is how engineers within NatWest are engineering on the inside of the bank, you know, in order to really leverage that inner source contribution model and also release, you know, through our route to lives. But at the bottom, you know, we've also got to consider that we are a Finos member. We are also, you know, consumers of other projects outside of Finos and the Linux Foundation. Plus, there are also other Git code repositories that live outside of our own ecosystem that we need to be able to contribute into. And so leveraging the Apache 2 license and all of the effort that has gone into Git proxy, through our Q1, we're actually integrating this into a dev environment so we can run a test and learn. And we're going to start engaging a lot more openly with the maintainers of Git proxy as well to have this moving forward. So this is basically an outline of our intentions and what we're doing. Not too bad for 5 weeks in. It'll be good to see what happens in 5 months' time. But if you've got any questions for me, feel free to ask me. But thank you for being here today.